Hey everyone, I thought it would be appropriate to share and start this video about community mapping with a map behind me. So really, if you're an educator and you're looking to connect your students better to their local communities, rather than starting really big with the sustainable development goals, start them really concrete with what problems they can solve in their community. And I really hope that this tutorial that takes you through that process helps you feel comfortable and confident to start that process with students. And be sure to let me know in the comments below what you think of it. With no further ado, let's dive into the session. Hey everyone, so welcome to the community mapping session. I hope you get a lot out of this. This is not my strategy that I developed, but rather one that was developed in working with some students in Hong Kong by a brilliant design thinker named Alfie Chung, who I'll introduce you to at the end of this presentation. But with no further ado, let's just dive right into it. Mapping community problems and using design thinking to solve them. As a mentor of mine told me, always start with the story, so I want to start with a story. And this is a story about a couple of students in Florida, and they combine their passion with some of their skills to really make an impact on the community. They noticed there was a problem with sea life and sea life getting caught into nets, and there's a lot of trash and plastic in the ocean. So they decided to take upon themselves to 3D print a biodegradable type of filter and bottle that would break down in the water. They tested it many times and had a final design that they shared with the Orlando Science Center, and actually is almost ready to be distributed and manufactured in their city where they live. So those are 12-year-olds. So, you know, if some of you are thinking, hey, my students are too young, they're never too young to solve problems. So how did they get there? That's what I want to show you. What is community mapping? Okay, so let's start by sharing a little bit about what community mapping is. Community mapping is an opportunity for students to create a shared map as to the problems that they have identified in the community. Let's watch this quick YouTube video. Hopefully this works, and the feedback's not too bad, but I'll be able to also share the link in the notes after we record this. So with no further ado, let's see this video.
What was wrong with the neighborhood, and to ask maybe how people felt about it.
We went to observe things in our community and watch it grow. And we also tried to interview some locals to try and find out what was happening in our community and what we need to fix in our community.
Well, not right now. We're making a map. So we're putting all the problems we found onto a Google map.
We can send it to people to let them know that this is where we found some problems, so maybe they could help fix these problems.
It was quite surprising because I actually met some of those things, like that one where the sign was pointing the wrong way. Like I've gone up that road so many times and I've actually never seen it.
When you just look out the window, you never realize these small problems.
Yeah.
But once you actually are determined to do it and you just walk around, you can actually see that there are a lot of things that we can work on and fix. Yeah.
So obviously quite a powerful method. Maybe one of the things that you heard or struck you in that video is seeing those kids are actually out in the community. They're interviewing, they're taking photographs, they're really trying to document these problems so they can then take that and try to think of some kind of solutions. So I'll give you an example of one of the maps. As you see here, students are divided into different groups. Hopefully I'll be able to use I'm gonna go back here, my pencil tool, and not necessarily click on the next slide. Guess I can't use that. But as you see here, group one was looking at some community accessibility problems. They noticed there's no drains. There's a sign that got taken down. There's a lot of energy waste that they noticed, and perhaps that's with the electricity. And really, students love to find problems. They really do. And the great part about this is that if you don't start necessarily having them just come up with solutions, then it gives them a real opportunity, takes the stress off as to come up with a solution and just finding problems. Now, the way you can divide this is you can divide this up into groups. You can assign students with different tasks. some could be your photographers, some could be your interviewers, some could be the ones who jot down the description of the problems that they see in the map. But the great part about this focus is it allows for differentiation of roles. Okay, so that's an example. You can also see another map here. They've mapped out community resources and problems. They didn't divide into groups. I think they had each student assigned individually. They found all their problems, and they started to identify icons that were related to those particular problems. If you click on these, you'll see the description of the problem and where it's located on the map. So a little bit later, I'm going to take you through this and show you how to create that community map. So we'll go through that tutorial together. But I want to jump into why community mapping. What's the why behind it? And as I mentioned before, the Sustainable Development Goals are a great connection. Notice how there's 17 distinct targets. And this is a great way for students in their community to really tackle these issues. No poverty is not going to happen overnight. But within their own local communities, if they can maybe use entrepreneurship or help to identify where these pockets of poverty exist, how do we then clean up that community perhaps? Or how do we bring more economic viability there? Those are things that they can address and they feel confident about. So it's a good way to get at the Sustainable Development Goals. Where do you find problems to solve? Okay, so how do you give students a particular lens as to, well, what are problems and how to identify them? Well, I just gave this presentation at a global education conference. And one of the brilliant ideas that came out of that is, why not start at your school? Start mapping out your school. And maybe you can put different lenses. One lens of the group, you can have different topics. One could be environment. One could be accessibility. One could be the beautification. One could be energy use. Just go around your school and have students then start to map out where they see these problems. This particular group of students saw a problem with the green space, and there wasn't really a lot of green space, and they wanted to be more green. Voila, they identified the problem and started to do class-based gardens so that they could really, really maximize the amount of green space. Another problem students can identify is within their community. This is an example of a typhoon that hit Hong Kong, one of the biggest to hit Hong Kong in years. And students were able to see that, hey, this caused a lot of problems, a lot of downed trees, a lot of roadways were blocked. And so you can jump out into your community. And this is context for finding your problems. So again, you can start big with the Sustainable Development Goals, then move granular with how you see those in your community, or just have students go out around topics, or don't even put any limitations and say, here's an example of a problem. Can you find more? Okay, so there's the why. Well, what process? Now we've got the students, they've said, look, Mr. Kyle or Mr. Wagner, as they call me, what process are we going to use now to solve these problems? Well, the good news is that there is a great process. It's already been put into place, and it's called the design thinking process. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. It came out of the Stanford Design School in a way to contextualize big kind of tasks and give designers a real concrete process to come up with, to create the best design. Okay, so it starts with empathy, understanding really how that problem affects different people and users, understanding their perspective. Is it really a problem? What are the specific problems that users have? Then you define that. You ideate, so you come up with tons of solutions. We'll look at what that process entails. You prototype, so then you do a prototype, a short prototype where you're actually using cardboard or using 3D printing to give an example of what that could look like when you solve that problem. And then you're testing it. And notice how that cycle goes big and then it narrows and it goes big. The whole point of that is you're getting students to go broad, then narrow, then broad, then narrow. The sky is the limit. That is correct. But their local community is the access point. Okay. I'll give you an example of how that was used before we go into that process. So in Hong Kong, students had identified, you know what? We need more green community space. What did they do? They went out, talked to members of community, looked to see where there was space that was not used. Voila, that was born the design of a green community space that people could share. They sketched up what that looked like in the community, a couple different ideations, and then pitched that to the local businesses and the local government that oversaw it. What a great way for students to become real problem solvers. Now, let's say you don't want to go out in your community. It's too big. Great. Identify problems within the school. So in this particular case, students are identifying that there's pets in all these different classes, but the habitats might not be the best for the pet. They went and interviewed students and did the empathy process, understanding what their needs were. They defined, particularly with what the needs of that animal was. They then designed a great habitat for that animal, and then they prototyped that with the animal itself, tested it, and now those animals have new habitats. Really cool project, pretty simple, design a pet habitat. Now, another community example is designing intergenerational play space. Students who noticed there was a park. The park was a little bit outdated. The park needed to have kind of a remodel. The fitness areas weren't being as well used as they should. That bore the idea of let's redesign a fitness space that really all generations can participate in, old generations and young generations. So this is them here using the design thinking process to plan out what that intergenerational play space might look like and how it might meet the needs of users. Finally, I want to share with this. This is access to the community. Speaking of access to the community, there's a lot of elderly who push carts in the neighborhood, and it's their only means of making money. They collect all the cardboard and then they distribute that. They put that in the cardboard collection center. They get some money for it, and it's very small. And these elderly are all the way up to age 65, 70 years old. So that bore the immediate idea of how do we help assist them? This shows then them helping to assist by creating brakes so they can slow down the cart when it's going downhill. They can also extend the cart so they don't have to hunch over. And they even had seatbelts to help protect the stuff that was inside of the cart. So these are some real practical examples of ways students got involved in helping their community. Now, let's go through a more particular case study to see how you might be able to use this with 11, 12-year-olds, all the way as young as 5 or 6-year-olds. So this is a project I introduce. Evelyn McCulloch, who works over at Park Maitland School in Florida, put this challenge to her students in her makerspace class, said, hey, let's help out our community. How can you use your passion to help your community? These two students, Connor and Olivia, loved to 3D print. These are all their 3D printed designs that they had done. And so they said, hey, how can we use 3D printing and tackle a local issue? Well, they connected 3D printing with the local issue of helping marine life. Now let's peek into their passion project logbook. As you notice here, they have a logbook. You don't have to create that. I'm going to provide you with these resources. You reach out to me via email. I'll give you the resources, and you can get students right away to start logging as they go through the design thinking process. Here's the process. It's laid out. The students have to start with empathize and understanding their users, and then getting through that process. Start with a passion. Start your kids with a passion. What are they interested in? Are they interested in marine life? Are they interested in parks in the community? Are they interested in green space? Are they interested in skateboarding? Because if your students are into skateboarding, they could survey the community space and look at, hey, is there a lot of space to skateboard? And if not, where can we put some more in? These girls' passion was with 3D printing, as I mentioned. It started the idea of the eco bottle. They started, though, with empathizing. They're trying to understand a little bit more about their users. In this case, the users are turtles and sea lions. Not exactly. The users are actually the people who are using the fish nets or the people who are using the plastic that ends up in the ocean. Why are they using plastic? Why are they purchasing bottles? What are their gains? What are their frustrations? Why aren't they bringing a bottle in that they can reuse over and over again that doesn't end up in the ocean? Why are they washing their hair with soap that ends up in the drain that then goes down to the ocean and these animals choke on it? Understand your user. You start with empathy, and that's what these students did. They found out the problem. They then defined the problem. They got very narrow. You go broad, and now you go narrow. The problem that they're trying to solve is the human's plastic waste. And how can we help to create less plastic waste that ends up in our waterways? They got very narrow, and they really wanted to tackle the plastic bottle industry. So helping your students go very narrow will help them to really get to a solution that's going to make an impact. Now, this is the fun part. You start ideating solutions. IDEO, which is an organization that works creatively to help businesses design, says you got to come up with 40 ideas. That's what these girls did. As they researched the problem, they first said, okay, can we create plastic eating enzymes? No, we don't have the lab. We don't have all the resources to do that. That's an idea that's not super feasible. Can we create a plastic cleaning robot? Well, we certainly can try, but we don't really know a lot about programming and robots. That's going to teach us a lot of skills. But what about this? We know how to 3D print. Could we create a biodegradable plastic container? Yes, we can do that. Bingo. They came up with that idea because they came up with 30 to 40 ideas. They measured them in terms of, are they feasible? And do we have the skills? Will they make an impact? Yes, they did. They prototyped those 2 different ideas, and they even tested them. They went down to their local waterway. They took their biodegradable water plastic bottles. They put it in the waterway. They even had a camera to photograph, and they documented how long it took for that bottle to biodegrade. Absolutely brilliant. And they measured it here, and they took the surveys and they posted their results. They thought like scientists, like citizen scientists. So this gives me chills thinking about, because it's absolutely just such a great process to go from a community map to a design thinking process to an actual mathematics that scientists would use in trials. So really cool way to combine your disciplines. And by the end, they finally did their reflections. They talked about their different tests and trials, what they learned from that, and where they might take this next. You might ask, well, what do they do with these bottles? I'm about to share that with you. They shared the idea with students in the class. They got some feedback. As you see here, there's their presentation backward. They created a Google site. And you might be thinking, that's amazing, round of applause. Well, they didn't stop there, because they really wanted to make an impact in the community. And you know how they made an impact in the community is the teacher, Evelyn McCulloch, who's brilliant, posed a very brilliant question to them. How do you keep working on this problem long after this class? And those students put their heads together and they said, we want to present at the Orlando Science Center. And even that impressed the teacher. So they did. They actually reached out to the Orlando Science Center, and they presented their idea at the Orlando Science Center with community members as real scientists on their solution. Again, I get goosebumps just talking about it. I hope you get goosebumps thinking about it. Your students can do the very same thing, and we're going to share how to do that. There's a design thinking template to guide the process. So in the notes below, email me. I'm putting my email in here. Email me, said, look, I watched this video. I want that process template. Great. I'm going to provide that process template for you so you can use that with your students. This is a great template that Evelyn had put together. All her students use it. It's in a Google shared space so that she can give feedback on the projects, or even mentors or other experts can as well. So reach out to me. I'm going to give you a whole folder full of resources to get you started right away. And now you might be wondering, well, how do I create that map? So I'm going to really briefly go through and show you how to do that. You're first going to go to Google, which I'm sure you go to many times. And once you're at Google, you're going to say, Google My Maps. And you go to Google My Maps. You click on that. If you've created a map before, it's going to take you to that place where you've created the maps. If not, it's going to direct you to create a new map. Again, you have to have a Google account to do this, which I'm sure most of you have. If not, get one. You're going to go to plus here. The plus button means you can create a new map. So I hit the plus button here, and I am now in the process of creating a map. I'm going to click here. What's your map title? If you divide students up into groups, perhaps they have a title, they're going to maybe put environmental problems in my community. Or if you've had them divided up by SDGs, you might say SDG goal number 1. Okay, mapping out the where we see instances of poverty. Okay, so or access to resources. Boom, I'm going to hit save. Now I've got my map, all right? Now you might be wondering, well, how then do I start documenting the problems? Well, I'm going to zoom in here in Shangwan, okay, which is where I'm located, and it's going to take me, boom, Shangwan. I'm going to close that. Now, right here is where I live, right near the Western Market. Now, what I've noticed is I'm going to put a marker here because right near where I live, you can see elderly pushing carts of cardboard. Okay, and I'm going to say this is a major problem because it is unsafe, and there are also a lot of economic problems. Okay, now of course you might elaborate on that, but I'm just giving that as a case study. Now I'm going to go here and click the picture button. When I click the picture button, it's going to take me to drop an image here, select a file. Sometimes that does not work, so I'm going to go back to your photos. Let's see, more Google Drive, and I go back to Google Drive and I go to recent, and I have already snapped this photo. Here it is. And so I'm going to select this. Now this shows an example of an elderly who's pushing the cart down the road, and there's no space for them. They're literally moving in and out of traffic. I can hit save. Great. Now what you can also do is you can click here and you can edit it again. So I'm going to go back to edit, hit save. I'm going to hit the paint bucket, and I'm going to identify that as a accessibility problem. So that icon I might have here, I might put the money sign. So I'm going to go to more icons and then put money. Okay, and I'm sure there's dollar sign maybe. Here you go, dollar sign. So I'm going to hit OK, and now I have that according to dollar sign. And for my group, I can start grouping these things together. Now, as you notice, it says elderly pushing carts of cardboard. So I go here, and after I click that, I am going to hit SDG goal number 1. Okay, so I know that all those problems are going to be associated with SDG goal number 1. Now you can add layers. So you say add layers, that's where you can add different layers based on different SDG goals. What we want to do is populate this map with all the problems that you can see, and then students can start to group those things together. But a really, really powerful strategy, and I hope you got a lot out of it. Now I'm going to go back here because you might be wondering again, well, how do I get access to this tutorial? How do I get access to the resources going to help guide students? Here's my Twitter, KWagsSD3. My email is kylewagner@transformschool.com. Evelyn McCulloch, teaching and learning coordinator at Park Maitland. Here's her Twitter handle and her email. And again, the person who I introduced you to at the beginning, Elfie Chung, who came up with this whole strategy as part of the Jane Goodall Institute here. He's a project associate and design thinking specialist at Poly U University. Here's his email. You can reach out to him as well. He said he'd be happy to field some questions around that. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you get a lot out of it, and share with as many people as you want. Email me if you have any questions or if you want those resources. And again, here's to your success and continue impacting students.